Will Donald Trump be on Joe Rogan after all? Podcaster Joe Rogan has reversed course and said he is open to having 2024 Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump on his show after denying the former president the chance to have a conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience previously.
So when are you having Trump on?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe.
Looks like you got something.
Maybe.
Okay, good. That's good. I think that's...
Look, at a certain point in time, it's just like, it would be interesting to hear his perspective on a lot of things. I would like to know, what is it like when you actually get into office? I would like to know things like, what is it like versus perception?
Yeah.
What is it actually like when you get in that building? Like, what are you greeted with? When do you know that people are with you? When do you know that the intelligence agency is lying to you? Like, when you decided to fire Comey, what was the thought? How much did you know? Like, what's the machine like? What is the deep state really like? Really like? Because we have all these, smoky room perceptions, like from the Bill Hicks joke, where they show you the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. What is the machine that runs this country? Because it's very clear that it's not as simple as elected representatives that are doing the will of the people.
Last year, the podcast giant said in regards to the former president, quote, "I'm not a Trump supporter in any way, shape, or form. I've had the opportunity to have him on my show more than once. I've said no every time. I don't want to help him. I'm not interested in helping him," according to USA Today. Yeah, I remember talking about this with Kim Iverson, our former co-host, when he said that, when Rogan said that about Trump. We were both a little, I think, surprised by it a little bit because, having him on isn't necessarily helping him. You could have him on and you could ask him tough questions and you could, give your viewers some reason to, maybe they'd like him better, maybe they'd like him worse. But I was kind of rejecting the idea that just having him on is some kind of endorsement, which is what Rogan seemed to be saying.
Well, a couple of things. I think the reality is that with the most popular podcast in America that gets more views than most cable news outlets on their best day, there is, while I think a lot of these, like, you're platforming them, like, complaints are ridiculous, there is a significant amount of juice that you can get out of going on the Joe Rogan show. It's not determinative. There are people who go on and their careers are unchanging and their subscriptions to their podcasts are unchanging and all of that. But it can be a really significant kind of validator in some respects. It does feel like a very different world from even, say, 2019, 2020 cycle, where allegedly, I think according to Joe Rogan, every Democratic major candidate was clamoring to get on a show, apparently behind the scenes, but the only person he actually had on was Bernie Sanders. And when Bernie Sanders did go on, of course, he got a whole lot of negative feedback from the Democratic establishment.
He got attacked, and by the media, by the mainstream media.
Which is very hypocritical if you consider that apparently Joe Biden and all of them were trying to get on behind the scenes. So there is an acknowledgement of everybody how valuable this show is. Now, what accounts for the change in attitude from Joe Rogan? I think it is a little different for Trump to be no longer the president of the United States, coming at it now as he is as a candidate who has been indicted all of these times. He does have more of an outsider veneer on him that does seem, frankly, in more line with the ethos of Joe Rogan's show. And I can understand having an appetite for talking to someone who is in some ways framed as the underdog, beleaguered candidate here, right, versus someone who is sitting in the Oval Office every day and who has all of the authority and power of the U.S. government behind him. Joe Rogan's show is fundamentally kind of an independent, anti-establishment show. So it does feel more natural tonally than it did before. But I also think this speaks to a shift where, to the extent that even Joe Rogan was making some attempt to appeal to a broader, more mainstream audience and not get dogged down with these accusations of being a far-right crazy person and saying, well, let me at least distance myself from Donald Trump. One, I think the mainstream media has been so unsympathetic to him that maybe he's tired of even trying to curry favor with him at all. And two, Trumpism is so entrenched now, and there are so many other figures in the world that aren't named Donald Trump who are arguably more anti-woke, more anti-LGBT, more anti-immigrant, that frankly make Trump seem like not that crazy a phenomenon these days. But I could see him wanting to give him the platform, or at least being open to it.
Well, and I hope if he does get that platform, that Rogan would ask not just, what is it like coming up against the deep state? Well, that would be a good question, but also, why didn't you do more, or will you do more if you become president again, to not just complain about the weaponization of the federal government against you, against your message, your views, and your voters, but why wasn't more done to stop that? And will you be more wary of nominating, of choosing people to work for you, whom everyone who's an actual MAGA person would have told you is not a good faith person who wants to fulfill that vision? That's
an excellent point. I mean, part of the reason that Joe Rogan had Bernie on and gave him that kind of tepid endorsement is because he said he believed in those policies. He was fundamentally actually a populist, that he was looking for people who were going to deliver materially for the working classes and the poor. He thinks that our healthcare system is a shambles and a real problem that needs a real resolution. So, I mean, Donald Trump, if he is invited on, could see this as a boon, but it could really backfire if Joe Rogan does what he has sometimes done in the past, which is to be a really hard principled interviewer and hold Trump to the standards that he used to, the values that at least he used to support himself. Well, the former president also faces a crucial deadline today. D.C. District Judge Tanya Chutkan has given Trump until 5 p.m. this evening to respond to the protective order motion in his election interference criminal case. The motion would bar Trump and his attorneys from improperly using any evidence, which may include sensitive and highly confidential information that prosecutors shared with the defense team before trial. We'll be sure to keep up with any developments there as well. Meanwhile, over on cable news, one MSNBC guest said Trump must be stopped from running again.
I thought after January 6th, when you saw McConnell speak, when you saw McCarthy speak, that was going to be the beginning of the leadership turning against him. And then somehow, it's not happened. And it can't just be a few of them. And we got to figure out, when is that going to happen? When is it going to break? And maybe the more this thing becomes clear what was done, you've got to believe that rational thought will come back in the minds of some of these people. But if not, then it's going to take the overwhelming organization, just as you were talking about earlier, organizing the country at all the levels so that he cannot win that election.
The people ultimately get to decide, not anyone else. The View's hosts Sunny Hostin and Joy Behar also weighed in on Trump's fate and where they'd like him to end up.
You know what about making a deal? What about Sonny if he makes a deal with Smith?
Without jail time?
And without jail. He says, look, I'm going away. I'm moving to Saudi Arabia. Wouldn't that be good? Just go away. I don't even care if he goes to jail. I don't have it in my heart to punish the guy. I just want him to go away and stop ruining my country.
I think there are certain prosecutors that would offer him a plea agreement without time if he would agree to never run for public office again anywhere.
And also go away. I don't even want to see him in the Inquirer.
Hold on. I have a legal note. Let's not get ourselves in trouble. Donald Trump has denied any wrongdoing related to the 2020 election.
Yeah, so the point that you made before that clip, that the voters ultimately get to decide, I think is the right one. And pundits are gonna, entertainment people are gonna say what they feel in their heart and what their opinions are, and that is what it is. But I am concerned that the core of this case is actually that Donald Trump and his team endeavored not to let the voters decide in 2020. And the crime that is being charged with here, despite a lot of coverage on conservative media, is not that he said the election was stolen. It's not that he said that people should be upset. It's that he conspired with the unindicted co-conspirators to coerce and threaten election officials in states around the country to wrongly, falsely, knowingly falsely certify slates of electors that would vote contrary to how the people of those 7 states actually voted. And I'm concerned that because there hasn't been a thorough description of what that scheme actually was on mainstream liberal TV until now, there was so much more focus on the 1/6 riot itself, which was is the tip of the iceberg of what was actually being designed. That people are unaware, I think, of the conservatives are largely unaware of the risks that Donald Trump actually does face here and being found guilty of some of this stuff, and how serious the plan that thankfully wasn't executed because of Republicans in those states with a great deal of integrity who refused to go along with it. That part of the story not being covered on any conservative news outlets, I think, is a real problem, and it leads people to think that this is a free speech issue, which I gotta say I just strongly disagree with that characterization.
I mean, well, as you know, I think it's more complicated than that. What you're laying out is, yes, that is the crime that has been alleged, that he is alleged to have committed. We're going to eventually hear his defense.
Sure.
What does make it, I mean, again, I think you can argue, that's what the prosecutor is going to have to argue, that he actually knew he hadn't won, and that the things he said to state election officials were threats because he knew he hadn't actually won, and he knew these schemes were thus improper. Again, I think I'm not like weighing in. I'm not like taking a side on this, but I think what his surrogates are going to argue, and what many conservatives are arguing, is that he sincerely thought he won, and the things he was saying was, find me the votes I think I actually do have out there that some people have told me I had. Now, people, again, wrong, and the people telling me this are wrong, and maybe they were lying and making it up, or they had bad information, but it wasn't. And in that light, it's not threats. He didn't take a baseball bat and say, I'm going to break your legs unless you say I won't. That is what we're arguing about.
Remember when the Virgin Islands representative said to Matt Taibbi in the context of the Twitter files that what you did was illegal? Mm-hmm. And we characterized that as a threat to prosecute him for reporting on the Twitter files, mm-hmm. right? That's how we characterized that. And I think that was appropriate. Donald Trump said the same thing to Raffensperger on the Georgia call. Don't you know that what you're doing is illegal? And that's coming from not a Virgin Island representative, but the then President of the United States of America.
But with Stacey Plaskett, no, that's actually a great example. I don't think what Stacey Plaskett did was illegal.
No, that's not the question. It's a threat. We characterized it as a threat.
Right.
Saying that what Matt Taibbi did was illegal was her threatening Matt Taibbi and trying to coerce him into silence.
It's a threat in a colloquial way, very bad behavior. And what Trump did, is very bad behavior. My view,
colloquially at least, it was a threat.
Yes, and my view is that he should have been held accountable through impeachment and removal, and we did that, and that's the result.
So all I was doing was defending my use of the word threat, which you had objected to. But that's not the crime that he's been charged with. The crime is that despite all of his senior lawyers, all of the chief lawyers in his entire Justice Department telling him that they had dutifully investigated charges of election fraud, brought a number of suits across the country to see if what election fraud had actually happened, they had resolved that there was none, or that the one case that they won didn't materially change the outcome of the election. It was, I think, the Pennsylvania case that gave them a few more days to count ballots. He was advised by all of his senior counsel that there was no election fraud. However, you have one attorney, John Eastman, and a number of other people who may or may not be barred at this time, I can't keep it straight, like Rudy Giuliani, telling him something different. We have the Eastman memo, which was a document setting out the entire plan by John Eastman, which was put into effect, which was to, in these 7 states that had enough electoral college votes to swing the election from Biden to Trump if they were discounted, to have the electors in those states have a secondary slate of electors put forward a second vote count, which they knew to be inaccurate, which was not what the states who have a lot of the full authority to run their own elections had come to.
They're going to have to prove. This is what has to be proved, that they knew that was inaccurate.
Yeah. So I
agree that you're laying out the case.
So one of Trump's defenses is that he was relying on the advice of counsel. But at what point are you cherry-picking counsel when all of your own Justice Department, this isn't Barack Obama's fault, this isn't Joe Biden's fault, this is Donald Trump's own Justice Department, all of his senior attorneys, tell him, we would love for you to win. But the reality is that we couldn't find any evidence of voter fraud that would change the results of the election. And then to be firing attorneys and looking for alternative advice until you find someone who's able to not only corroborate your view, not actually give you any evidence that your view is accurate and correct, but who has hatched a plot for you to, despite there being no evidence of fraud that would change the result of the election, undermine the lawful election results by getting Republicans in 7 states to go along with a scheme to submit inaccurate slates of elections. And some of those Republicans testified in the 1-6 hearing, and they said, oh, I was told, and this fraudulently, I was lied to by the Trump team and told that this slate of electors was only going to be sent to the Library of Congress and to the Senate if the lawsuits in our state, the election fraud lawsuits in our state, resolved in Trump's favor. This was a backup slate of electors because it was all coming down to the wire, and I only even signed up for this thing, not because I wanted to overturn the dutiful results, but just in case it turns out that there really was election fraud, and Trump really did win this state. And they were very frustrated that they've been entangled in this scheme. So at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, and this is what Trump is going to have to prove in court, if you are misleading Republicans in states into signing onto this document in the first place, if all of your lawyers are telling you that you have not, in fact, won this election, if all of the lawyers and attorney generals across the country who have been pursuing these election fraud cases lose, and your Justice Department is telling you, unfortunately, there's nothing else there, and you still pursue an agenda of having fake slates of electors sent to Congress, and you're leaning on and pressuring your vice president to open the fake slate of electors and declare that there was so much ambiguity that he could not decide the election, that it has to be thrown to the House of Representatives, at which point Republicans would win because it's by state, and Republicans controlled 26 state houses to Democrats' 24. Then does that constitute an unlawful scheme to overturn legal election results?
Yeah, that's what we're going to be adjudicating, but it's not on Donald Trump to prove that it's on the government to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, exactly what you just laid out. Yeah. And they might very well be able to do it, but I don't think it's, from my perspective, I don't think it's quite right to say it's not. Speech is a murky thing. We're going to adjudicate where the speech part ended and where the alleged criminal conspiracy began, but it is all speech adjacent. Well, we'll see. More Rising right after this.